Hi, welcome to the Culture Curators Podcast. We're here to share insights, information, and resources to help you become a more effective salon and business leader. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Today, we're going to talk about tipping. To tip or not to tip? That's the question, right?
It is, and it's a controversial question. I don't know when this got so people are fiery about this thing, man. People are so intense about if we should take tips, if we shouldn't take tips. So we decided, you know what? We're going to talk about it. We're going to give you our opinions. I'm full of opinions generally. I'm definitely full of a huge opinion on this one. I actually have a very clear opinion on this one. I'm not whiffle waffling.
Whiffle waffling. That's a good term for you, I think. I think that I don't know if I whiffle waffle, but I definitely have an opinion on this, and I know how our salon was, and we chose to accept tips. We chose to gratefully and heartfelt thankfully accept tips. And I know in some communities, in some salons, they're choosing not to accept tips. Now, the thing that I find interesting about that, in particular, the salons that say they have a no tipping policy, when I've spoken to those business owners, every single one that I've spoken to says, well, if somebody gives us a cash tip or wants to Venmo us, of course we're going to accept that. So I'm like, well, then you're a tipping salon, aren't you?
That one doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
But every single business owner that has a no tipping policy has told me that. So I don't get it.
I don't get it. I don't honestly, I really don't get why we've gotten so adamant that, the salon industry is too good to take tips. This is what I will say. It's your decision to take tips or not. I'll give you my opinion on what I do for me. I don't have an opinion on what you have to do for you. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that we're making nowadays, just in culture in general. But let's keep it specific to the salon industry. Like social media, it's like yes or no, black or white. You're right or wrong if you do it a certain way. And yes, are there certain things that are just totally wrong and out of bounds? Yes. But when it comes to tipping, it's up to you. And I'll be real. You want to know what my example is or what my thought is? I mean, if a client's going to hand me money, I ain't never turning that away. Sorry, I'm just not. I'm going to be real with you. I charge $120 a cut right now. If a client chooses not to tip me, I am totally fine with that. That is perfectly her decision. And if she asks me if I accept tips or not, I say I would always I appreciate a tip. I never expect a tip. So I want you to do what's best and what's most comfortable for you. And I'd say 8 out of 10 clients of mine tip me. And I'm incredibly grateful for it. But I'm just confused on why I would turn that money away. I just am. And you know what? If you are confused why I'd take a tip, that's what makes the world go round. So it doesn't make me right and you wrong or vice versa. And I think that, a lot of coaching programs in the industry have gotten so hard stanced on certain things. You have to do it this way, or you have to do it that way, or you're wrong. And I honestly think that that's wrong. And a lot of those coaching companies are the ones that throw the word toxic around a lot. And I honestly believe that having that type of thinking is what's toxic, because who am I to tell you what you should absolutely do or not do for your business, especially when it comes to money in your pocket? So if a client wants to tip us, we're happy to accept the tip. We've also implemented in many of our salons, I have it in mind, an ATM. So if we're not going to take tips on a credit card, we're happy for the client to utilize our ATM and then take cash from it so that they can then disperse tips as they see fit. So again, we never, ever, ever expect it. We always, always, always appreciate it. And I'm gonna get off my soapbox now.
Okay. Well, there is several ways of tipping. And before I go into that, I just find it so interesting that as an industry, that this is even a topic, especially when every other industry that you've never even thought about tipping in now certainly expects a tip.
Well, it's so funny that you just said that, because I saw this article. It was I don't know if it was Wall Street Journal or New York Times, or it definitely was something like that, but it was on their social media page. And it was tipping culture, and how it's this tipping guilting kind of culture. You now go get an $8 Starbucks coffee and they're expecting a tip, or they're kind of prompting you to a tip. There's certain, softwares like Square, for instance, that it's like it's just automated. Which percentage of tip would you like? If you order DoorDash, if you order Uber Eats, it's like it's expected before you even got the service.
Exactly. I'll tell you what, I'm going to stand on the corner. I'm just going to smile and I'm going to expect tips for smiling.
Tipping's
Because
expected. Big sign.
because that's where we've come as a society. It just blows my mind. And yet here we are as an industry and we're like, oh, should we tip? Should we take tips? Shouldn't we take tips?
What industry would you say that we're in?
We're in the beauty industry.
Right, but like the greater part of the beauty, like the umbrella of the beauty industry.
We're in the service industry.
Exactly. The service industry generally, there's always been, forget 2024 or the tipping culture nowadays. There's always been a tipping culture in a service-based industry. When you go to a restaurant, don't you tip the waiter
Yeah.
or waitress?
Well, the reason I believe the reason that tipping became something was because in the industries that had lower hourly rates,
Right.
the way that they could bring that hourly rate up is through the consumer tipping them. And so the restaurant industry, the beauty industry, some of those industries had lower wages, and to try and compensate for that, some brilliant person decided maybe consumers should tip. And that's how it all started. And now it's, I mean, it's people who are making $30 an hour, some that are expecting tips. And so I know we could definitely get on a soapbox. So let's talk about if a business chooses to accept tips. You said ATM, that's one way.
Mm-hmm.
I think another way is to have all the service providers have their Venmo
Mm-hmm.
account accessible. There's an app called Tippy
Mm-hmm.
that you can use. I think that's pretty prevalent throughout our industry for salons that do accept tips to
Zelle.
use Tippy. You can use Zelle and, of course, cash, right? If anybody writes checks anymore, you could accept a check. So there's a number of ways to accept a tip without putting it on your credit card. You never want to have them put it on their credit card because then there's a fee that's associated with it. And sometimes people aren't passing along that fee to the consumer. And so the business owner then actually has to pay for the service provider to be tipped on a credit card, which we never want to see.
Yeah, we don't often have like super duper, as I mentioned, hardline stances on things, but that would be one of them, that we don't believe that you as a business owner should accept tips on credit card for the very reason Jill just mentioned. It's costing you money to distribute that tip to your team. So it's just there's too many other ways that they can tip. You should be claiming the tips that make sense for you in your state. Absolutely. Obviously, taking cash tips sometimes creates a blurry line in there. That's going to be up to you and your service providers and the way you run your business. But the reality is you reserve every right to accept or not accept a tip based on the culture that you believe works for you. And you should never feel pressured by social media or comparison purposes or anything like that. The comparison culture, I'll call it, that you should just stop taking them. And I know that there was a recent post, I remember this was on Hairbrain, where they were asking about this. And man, if you went into the comment section, it's like, oh my God, if I'm taking a tip now, I'm like the devil. It's wild. Like, God forbid I'm not like a professional hairdresser because I accept a tip. When I say I'm kind of speaking for all of us that do accept tips. And it doesn't make me, I don't vilify someone that doesn't take a tip. That's what works for them.
That's okay.
For a lot of salons that have moved into, hourly based pricing, that tends to absorb tips, quote unquote. But again, we've talked to many hourly based pricing salons that say they don't accept a tip, but when the client hands it to them or Venmos them, they do accept it. So that's where we get a little bit confused, because then where are you really? Like, are you actually accepting them? Are you not? Are you kind of picking and choosing, which is what that one kind of sounds like.
Exactly. It really does. And so to tip or not to tip, and it's really not to tip or not to tip, it's to accept a tip or not to accept a tip. It's up to you. It's up to your brand. It's up to your culture. There's not a right or a wrong answer here. It's what's the best answer that works for you.
Yeah, and you know what? You also, I think, as we're wrapping this up, you reserve the right to change your mind. I mean, if one point
Absolutely.
you didn't take them and you want to take them, or vice versa, there's ways that you can, describe that to the client. So for instance, I've been an Uber user since Uber, it was just Uber black cars. That's all it was. It was like Lincoln Town Cars in New York City, like years and years ago was what Uber was.
Mhm.
And I was like amazed at the technology of it. I didn't even know it was called Uber at the time. And one of Uber's original
Yep.
marketing things was that you didn't have to tip the driver. And now guess what? If you're taking an Uber lately, they're encouraging you to tip the driver, and they let you know that the driver gets 100% of the tip. So they've changed their entire brand stance or position on that. So there are ways that you can change and adjust it and kind of package it correctly to the client on why or how you're making these certain changes. And at the end of the day, it is your business. You reserve the right to decide what makes the most sense for you and your team.
Absolutely. So accept a tip or not. Let us know. Comment if you accept tips and what you find, or if you're choosing not to. Either way is okay. It's your choice. Just go out and make it a great day.
Well, I was making a great day. I don't know where that one came from, but we'll roll with it. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Culture Curators podcast. Please like, comment, follow, and subscribe.